Hey guys, this looks like a fun one. It says find the area of the rhombus. I wonder what it's going to be. If you want to try it on your own, pause it right now because I'm going to solve it in 3, 2, 1. So the area of a rhombus is equal to 1/2 diagonal times diagonal. This label is clearly half of the vertical diagonal. But this label, I can't tell, is it part of this diagonal or is it part of this side? I think this is ambiguous, so let's look at both cases. Case number 1, this is half the diagonal. And in case number 2, this is the side length of the rhombus. Let's solve for both cases. So the area of a rhombus is equal to 1/2 diagonal 1 times diagonal 2. For the horizontal diagonal, if this is 70 of this stuff, this half would also be 70 of this stuff. And that means that the entire diagonal would equal 140 of this stuff. And then for the vertical diagonal, if this is 1.5 this stuff, this would also be 1.5 this stuff, meaning that the entire diagonal would be 3 of this stuff. And now we can clean things up. Let's make everything a fraction. We can take this, put it up here, and put it over 1. Well, let's deal with the whole numbers first. This 140 divided by 2 is equal to 70. And then 70 times 3 is equal to 210. Now let's smush everything together. Next, I want to look at this 8476. 8476 is the same thing as 4 times 2119. And then since both of these are under the fourth root, we can give them each their own fourth root. And now we have a fourth root of 2119 on top and bottom. Those can cancel each other out. Let's play around with this fourth root of 4. Here are the notes for rational exponents. If you have the nth root of a number, you can rewrite it as that number to the 1 over n power. So we can rewrite this fourth root of 4 as 4 to the 1/4 power. And then we can break out this 1/4 into 1/2 times 1/2. So now we have a base to some exponent times an exponent. That looks a lot like these notes right here. We have a base to some exponent times an exponent. We're able to put a parentheses around this part right here. So now that we have a 4 to the 1/2, we can look at these notes again, and we can rewrite this as the square root of 4. And the square root of 4 is equal to 2. And then we have 2 to the 1/2, which we can rewrite as the square root of 2. Square root of 2 times square root of 2 is equal to square root of 4, and square root of 4 is equal to 2. And 210 times 2 is equal to 420. We now have the area of this rhombus. It's equal to 420 units squared. This looks important. Let's put a box around it. Now let's figure out the area for case number 2. So in a rhombus, there are 2 important properties of diagonals. They always meet at right angles, and they always bisect each other. So for this vertical diagonal, if this is equal to 1.5 of this is also 1.5 of this. We don't know this diagonal. Let's call this part x, and let's solve for x. Let's focus on this right triangle and do the Pythagorean theorem. It'll be x squared plus this thing squared equals this thing squared. And now let's clean this up. This 1.5 is being multiplied by this root, so this squared will distribute to both of those things. And then this squared will also distribute to all 3 of these things. Next, let's subtract this from both sides of the equation. On the left-hand side, these will cancel each other out. And then on the right-hand side, we can just bring this up here. First, let's clean up this numerator. The square root and the 2 are going to cancel each other out. And then 70 squared is equal to 4900. And then 4900 times 2 is equal to 9800. And now let's look at the denominator. We have a fourth root of this thing, which we can rewrite as this thing to the 1/4 power. And then this 1/4 can be multiplied by the 2 to give us 1/2. Now let's look at this part. 1.5 squared is equal to 2.25. And then we can rewrite the fourth root of this as this to the 1/4 power. And then 1/4 times 2 is equal to 1/2. Both of these 1/2s are the same thing as square root, so we can change this to the square root of 2119 and this to the square root of 8476. We can break down the 8476 into 4 times 2119, and since they're both under the square root, we can give them each their own square root. Square root of 4 is equal to 2, and 2.25 times 2 is equal to 4.5. And then from here, we can express this as a fraction by putting it over 1, and now we're subtracting 2 fractions. The only way we can do that is if they both have a common denominator. In order to give this a denominator of root 2119, I'm going to multiply top and bottom by the square root of 2119. On top, the square root of this times the square root of this is equal to this. And on bottom, 1 times the square root of 2119 is equal to the square root of 2119. We can clean up this top a little bit more. 4.5 times 2119 is equal to 9535.5. Since these 2 fractions have a common denominator, we can express them as a single fraction with the same common denominator. And 9800 minus 9535.5 is equal to 264.5. To get x all by itself, we can square root both sides of the equation. On the left-hand side, the square root and the square will cancel each other out. And now we've solved for x. X is equal to the square root of all this stuff. So we can update this x to be the square root of all that stuff. And now we're ready to find the area of this rhombus. So this half is equal to this root. This half will also be equal to that root. So once again, the area is equal to 1/2 diagonal times diagonal. For the first diagonal, it'll be 2 of these square roots. And then 1.5 of this plus 1.5 of this is 3 of this. Now we just got to clean this up and we're done. This 1/2 and this 2 will cancel each other out. And then with this fraction inside of the square root, we can give both the top and the bottom their own square root. And then on bottom, this square root of a square root is the same thing as the fourth root. Let's rearrange these and make the second one a fraction. We can break down the 8476 into 4 times 2119, and then this 4 and this 2119 can each have their own fourth roots. So we have a fourth root 2119 on top and bottom. They can cancel each other out. And then let's mess around with this fourth root of 4. Let's change this 4 into 2 squared, and let's pull the squared out. We can rewrite the fourth root of 2 as 2 to the 1/4, and then we can multiply 1/4 times 2 to get 1/2. And then we know that 2 to the 1/2 exponent is the same thing as square root of 2. Let's rearrange things a little bit, and then this square root and this square root can be combined under the same square root. 264.5 times 2 is equal to 529. And the square root of 529 is equal to 23. 3 times 23 is equal to 69. Nice. And now we have the area of our second case. It's equal to 69 units squared. And this looks important. Let's put a box around it. So for this ambiguous rhombus, we don't know for sure what the area is, but we know it's either 420 units squared or 69 units squared. How exciting.